My values, systems, and beliefs that shaped my career, I would say, are a deep understanding of science, deep appreciation of science, logic, reason. In the most difficult times, I would say I never ended up praying to God. So I was a very strong person when it came to science and when it came to reason and logic. The reason for me doing an MBA was not to actually get a foothold outside of engineering, but to really understand how organizations work a little more holistically. Human capital can be very strategic for a company that is transforming, and startups in some ways are constantly transforming. There's many a slip between the cup and the lip. You can plan whatever you wish to, you can have whatever dream you want to, but the journey sometimes can go through ups and downs, and you can never ever predict what the final outcome would be.
So, good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. We are in conversation with Hari, a startup veteran, author, and mentor with over 22 years of experience, including scaling unicorns and leading a NASDAQ listing. Hari is currently an executive chairman of Steer World, where he focuses on innovation, material science, and guiding founders. And with that very brief discussion, welcome to the talk, Hari. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you for having me. I love being here.
Likewise, So Hari, there's just so much to unpack. I mean, there's so many facets to your, to your personality. I mean, being in the corporate world, then being, really, I think, deep in as an operator in the startup world, then advising to funds, and then of course being an author of 7 books. So I think why don't we just kind of, kick this off by you just kind of walking us and telling us about your life journey and how you landed up doing what you did.
So very briefly, I'll try to keep it as short as possible, Vivek. So, I studied engineering from IIT Madras, mechanical engineering 1986, back-to-back MBA from IIM Calcutta. Prior to that, as I grew up, I developed a deep interest in science. So in terms of, my values, systems, and beliefs that shaped my career, I would say are a deep understanding of science, deep appreciation of science, logic, reason, so much so that from a very early age, I was an atheist, I would say. And I always, even in the most difficult times, I would say I never ended up praying to God. So I was a very strong person when it came to science and when it came to reason and logic. That shaped my thinking, that shaped my beliefs, that shaped my professional life and the way I have thought about life in general. And my career can be broadly divided into 3 or 4 buckets. The first bucket is I began with Tata Steel as a mechanical engineer on the shop floor. Loved, applying what I'd studied at college, actually on the field. And you realize that application is very different from what you learn in theory. And it was absolutely fascinating. In fact, the reason for me doing an MBA was not to actually get a foothold outside of engineering, but to really understand how organizations work a little more holistically. And I, played that role of an engineer on the shop for 11 years. After that, for 3 years, I was in the area of human capital. That was the time when Tata Steel was going through a bit of an existential crisis. Post liberalization, several countries were dumping steel into India at prices that were below our cost. So we had to really cope up and do something very fundamentally different. And that's when we chose to work with McKinsey, restructure the company, right size the organization. I was part of this core group from Tata Steel. And that's when I realized that, human capital can be very strategic for a company that is transforming. And startups in some ways are constantly transforming. Which brings me to the second aspect or second phase of my career, which is I worked with a bunch of startups for the last 22 odd years with very high, fast paced, high growth organizations. All 5 startups found successful exits. All of them, when I joined, had found product market fit. So I didn't join early stage startups. My core capability that I developed over the years is about scaling startups and businesses where there's a reasonably clear product market fit. And 3 of those companies, went on to become unicorns. One we listed on NASDAQ. And then, finally, I was thinking what to do. And for a short while, I did this Artha School for Entrepreneurship as a not-for-profit. And then I realized that's not my cup of tea. I mean, you end up having to raise philanthropy money because
Right.
people can't pay for this, and you need to raise this kind of money. It wasn't really my cup of tea. I wasn't enjoying it, so I came back to doing what I do best and what I love to do, which is being an operator. So work for now for a group of deep tech companies, and I'm enjoying this journey back to, doing real engineering work, working for engineering company, helping take the right kind of decisions. Eventually, we want to make this group one of the world's most innovative group of companies, and hopefully also make it a listable company in 3 years' time. We may or may not list. That's a choice that we can make, but it should be run in a very predictable manner and should become a
Right.
listable company. That's where my goal is.
Fascinating stuff. Hari, I was just very curious, when you talked about being an atheist, so does that give you a healthy dose of skepticism about whatever you do in life and how you look at things?
Not really. I think, I also over the years developed some wisdom to acknowledge that people will believe, and even blind belief is all right as long as it gives people some strength. So I think
Right.
being inclusive and accepting that people will come from different vantage points in their fundamental beliefs and values is all right. As long as those beliefs don't hurt anybody else, I think you can all coexist and work together. But I think once you come to building companies, I think reason and logic is far more important than anything else.
Yeah, true that. That actually opens up many questions, but I would like to actually dive deep into probably the more exciting part of your life, which was being with those 5 startups. So tell us a little bit about your stint. I mean, you were with Taxi for Sure, you were with Virtusa, I believe, which the one that you,
Yes.
took for a NASDAQ listing. There was, of course, also Big Basket, right? Uh, I mean, I think that spending time with one startup can be very exciting. You've been through a few of them. Just share with us some of the interesting times, the difficult times, and some interesting anecdotes from them.
So each of those 5 startups actually operated in a different domain. One was in, BPO, the first one, then was in IT services product company, then was investment research, outsourcing, then consumer internet, and then e-commerce. And now
Mhm.
an engineering company, deep tech engineering company. So I
Right.
think, one of my core strengths has been curiosity. So I've been an extremely curious person. And because of this curiosity, I've been able to quickly learn new domains, and I apply first principles thinking wherever I go. So,
Mhm.
irrespective of whether I understand something or not, by applying first principles thinking and through curiosity, I'm able to very quickly understand what are the key drivers of a business, what are the essence of every business. So that's
Mhm.
how I've enjoyed myself, and very interesting moments in each of those. And for example, at Daksh, at one point of time, we had a severe client concentration, and that happens in services businesses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at that point of time, one client actually canceled, and that client gave us a significant revenue.
Right.
And for us, then it was a choice. And I'll tell you that story probably in a little more detail, and I'll,
Yeah.
may not spend too much time on anything else. So we
Mhm.
were, IBM was advising a telecom company in the US called Sprint. Sprint
Mhm.
was number 6 or number 7. And IBM promised them, what, we'll work with you and take you to number 2 or 3. And one of that number 2 or 3, the path to number 2 or 3, was in taking customer service to the next level. And at Daksh, we were providing customer service to Sprint, both on the
Mhm.
voice and the non-voice side. And IBM advised Sprint, what, India is not the best place to provide customer service in terms of voice. Philippines is a much better
Philippines.
destination because of close cultural connect that
Yeah.
Americans have with Filipinos, and the accent, everything, English speaking skills. So they decided that, what, we'll move the work out of India, which means that the Dutch contract with Sprint was cancelled. So for us, then it was all about picking up, all the broken pieces and rebuilding the company. At that point
Right.
of time, IBM came and told us, what, we are thinking of entering this space. We would like to, make an acquisition. Would you be interested? So
Mhm.
very strategically, they took Sprint out of Dutch and acquired us at pretty much, I would say, like a fireside sale. Although it was a good deal overall, but we could have been
Mhm.
much bigger.
Right.
So I encountered similar things in many places. For example, at Daksh, we thought we could be the Infosys of the BPO world. We could be the first, public company in the BPO space, become an Infosys. Then you
Right.
realize, that building a company, there's a many a slip between the cup and the lip. You can plan whatever you wish to. You can have whatever dream you want to, but the
Mhm.
journey sometimes can go through ups and downs, and you can never ever predict what the
Right.
final outcome would be. Virtusa,
Mhm.
we went through the same thing. We listed the company on NASDAQ. Finally, we were a public company. And then we were planning to go private all over again because Meta wanted to acquire, Virtusa. So many things. One lesson I realized is that, you can have great, aspirations. You can, have great plans, but there is so much of uncertainty, especially in building and scaling companies, that
True
it's
that.
impossible to really predict what the end state would be like.
You just got to go with the flow, in a
Yes,
startup here.
yes.
What was your your journey that happened with Taxi for Sure? Which period was that, and how did that pan out?
So Taxi for sure was an exciting 12 to 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
So Ola had a head start,
Mm-hmm.
over Taxi for sure by being just a year ahead of us. And this is the, business where there is a very strong network effect, which means
Right.
that once you have grown big, you will grow bigger. Some businesses may not have network effect, but food delivery and messaging like WhatsApp and urban mobility is very very network effect driven kind of a business. So Ola was ahead of us, and therefore I think they were able to close financing deals much faster than us. And
Right.
the day they raised $120 million from SoftBank at a valuation of $1 billion, we knew the game was up because we were burning money, they were burning money. They raised more
Right.
capital, and then the investors of both these companies, common investors, figured out that why should both these companies be burning money? Why don't they
Right.
get together? Because that was the time when the Uber threat was looming in India.
Right.
And the common investors felt that the two together would be able to give a better fight to Uber, and that's how we got together. Actually, we were running out of cash to even pay salaries
Right.
at Taxi for sure. But
Right.
and then Ola could have allowed TFS to die, but then the fear of Uber was always there. If
Yeah.
Ola didn't acquire TFS, then Uber would. So
Yeah.
we were in a lucky spot in some way.
Mhm.
And despite that, situation, the deal was good. The company was sold for $200 million. A company that had
Yeah.
no money to pay the next month's salary, but being acquired for $200 million was a great deal.
Right. I remember that time well because I think both of us were getting quite by the same company at that
Mhm.
time,
Oh,
and
yes, that's correct. That's
they
correct.
were doing the DD and they all disappeared, and we were wondering what the hell happened, and
Uh-huh.
then later on we realized that they were after a bigger fish at that point in time,
Yeah.
and they said that look, just give us a few minutes and we'll be back, on closing this out, right? But interesting times, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think it's
Absolutely.
many ways it changed the mindset of entrepreneurs, Indian entrepreneurs at that time, right? Because you always had this whole notion that whatever it is, we can always build. Just give us like a 20
Yes.
engineers and we build this out. But I think the
Yes.
mindset shift that I think the
Yeah.
Ola team brought in terms of thinking
Correct.
about acquisitions, inorganic acquisitions, right?
Right. Right.
I think changed the space. I think India has been quite different. The startup ecosystem has been very different since then. Would you agree with
Right.
that?
Yes, I would partly agree with that. So, yeah, acquisitions is the right way, in some situations, though may not be
Right,
always, but in that point of time, that was the right decision.
right. Yeah. So a few things that you said, and I think I just wanted to kind of go back to, one of the thoughts that you talked about, saying that you love, kind of looking at insights, working on first principles thinking, and somewhere even in your profile, you've talked about the fact your ability to kind of connect the dots, look at things which have been very counterintuitive, but being able to really see, something which is out there. Any instance that you'd like to share when one of your counterintuitive first principle thinking kind of came up with with some insight that kind of saved the day, either for you or for the company or something like that.
So, I would say that, first principle thinking and being able to connect the dots has been a strength of mine.
Hmm.
And it's an extremely strong thing that I bring to the table. And I
Hmm.
do that every day. It's not that, a miraculous connecting the dots actually alters the trajectory of a company. Those things probably
Hmm.
can happen as well. But you need to be able to connect the dots on an everyday basis because you're solving complex problems on an everyday basis. And being
Yeah.
able to figure out patterns, make the right strategic choices. You can make a right strategic choice, provided you're able to connect the dots. So
Hmm.
probably I'll just give you some examples. It may or may not have worked out. So,
Right.
for example, at Big Basket, I'll give you two examples. So, Big Basket
Hmm.
was the first, e-commerce company to actually begin express delivery. So,
Yeah.
BB was the winner, undisputed winner in the early phase of the grocery, online grocery wars. And at that point of time, all grocery was delivered next day in slots, or probably the same day, late evening in slots. You could pick a
Right.
slot and it would be delivered during the slot. But then the company figured out that, you know what, well, the customers also need an unplanned set of items. And for that, they need that quickly. They can't wait for the next day. So we introduced a 60 to 90 minute delivery with a limited number of SKUs. And when the app was developed, I made 2 points to the founders of BB. One is that, you need to create a fork right at the beginning and give customers a choice to figure out whether they're shopping for express or they're okay for a slotted delivery the next day. But I think the
Right.
founders came from very strong legacy thinking, as a
Mhm.
result of which they didn't make that fork right at the beginning. So a
Mhm.
customer would go into Big Basket, place 20 order for 25 items, and when they were closing the cart, they would get the message that 6 items are available in 60 minutes.
Yeah.
These 19 items are available next day. It just doesn't
Right.
make sense at all, because when a
Right.
customer comes, they clearly want things immediately or they can wait. They have to make the
Right.
choice upfront. To me, that was a big strategic error. And
Right.
that strategic error actually played a big role in us prematurely shutting it down. And in terms of pricing, for example, it's very obvious to me that you have to charge, a premium, a significant premium for express delivery over next day deliveries. Again, the thinking came that customers are objecting, saying that, why does one, service cost more? Why do tomatoes on one, express cost 10% more? And they're upset with that. But the point is that there will be some customers who will come to you and feel upset about it. But you need to decide on what's going to work for the majority of the customers, because those who wanted to
Right.
express will happily pay more. That would
Right.
have changed the economics as well. So to me, I think it was very obvious. The other strategic mistake, was in being able to figure out, that the writing on the wall is that people want immediate deliveries. Next day
Yeah.
just doesn't seem to work. So COVID hit and Swiggy launched a 45-minute delivery and limited number of SKUs, 45 minutes. To me, that was very, very clear, because I began shopping with Swiggy and I found I got hooked to that. 30
Mhm.
minutes, your stuff would be here. Then this
Mhm.
was again, we discussed this, and I wrote an article in Money Control, and saying that ultimately I had to just go out in public and take a position. I said, the 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you know, 8,000 to 10,000 SKUs will win this war. That is what is going to be the winning model, not
Right.
100,000 SKUs next day. Because
Right.
customers don't care for 100,000 SKUs. They don't want to buy a pressure cooker, probably. They will buy a pressure cooker from Amazon. So they want 10,000 SKUs delivered very quickly. For the rest, there's Amazon. So I predicted this as well, that, I didn't know that 10 minutes would actually win. For me, I predicted about 2.5 years back that 30 minutes, 10,000 SKUs is the winning model. So being able to connect the dots like this, and I do this on an everyday basis where we have to make choices, in different parts of our business.
No, I think great insights. And as an entrepreneur, I think these are not just product insights. I mean, these are all very strategic insights because these define the customer experience, they define the business model, they define your logistics, your
Yeah.
warehousing, all of that, right? I mean, it's fascinating how some of these small, so-called small decisions really have such a huge impact, right? Um, and it's also very fascinating to see that how, in this earlier avatar, Grofers was beaten, by, Big Basket. But now
Yeah,
in this new upstart of
absolutely.
Blinkit, it's like probably
Yeah, tables
uh,
are turned.
yeah, tables have really turned in that.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you see this thing panning out? Because I think now when you look at it, when you look at the inventory, let's say, or for example, the whole shopping experience now on Blinkit and Zepto, the SKUs are really going deeper now, and I think you
Yes,
suddenly have electronic items and stuff like
correct.
that. And I just read the other day that now you probably have maybe Chroma and Flipkart,
Yes.
trying to be the the Zepto in electronics right now. So what is your intuitive thought behind all of this now?
So I think it's slightly difficult to predict at this point of time how things would pan out. But what is very clear is that all these companies are testing the limit of express delivery. They are
Yeah.
figuring out, what can be delivered in 10 minutes. What
Mhm.
used to be delivered in a day, can it be delivered in 30 minutes? Can a television be delivered in 30 minutes?
Yeah.
So, for example, can a PlayStation be delivered in 30 minutes? So I think companies, startups are exploring, what is possible in terms of express delivery, the range of SKUs, the range of delivery times. So that 10 minutes may change to these 10,000 SKUs in 10 minutes, these 3,000 SKUs in 30 minutes. So I sense that everyone is testing the limits of express deliveries in some way.
Right. And that brings me to another point. I've often wondered, especially when you look at markets like the lead markets like US in that sense, right? We obviously kind of try to obviously emulate them, right? But when it comes to these, quick commerce, we just seem to be setting the standards for, for the world right now. What is it about Indian customers and the American customers? I mean, that's so different because, I mean, we obviously don't have same-day delivery. I mean, forget about a 10-minute delivery at the scale that we have right now happening in India, right? Is it just the cost arbitrage, the labor arbitrage, which is making it work? Are the consumers somehow different? There are so many hidden costs right now when you actually order from, let's say, Zepto or Insta. You don't realize that you're paying obviously more for the convenience. But any thoughts on that?
I think two things where India is different from the US, which really makes quick commerce work in India. The first is that the population density, which is that houses are in a close proximity, very very dense clusters. Our urban centers are dense clusters, which makes the economics work out much better. The second thing where India is different from the US is labor costs. Ultimately, this is very, very labor intensive. There is a bit of technology, but it's hugely labor intensive. There is a delivery, partner, person, human being who is actually taking out and delivering every order, even if it is, $8. Imagine $8, which is 500 and 600 rupees, is being delivered by a person. So the cost of manpower is low in India. In the US, there's no way you can deliver an $8, or $10 kind of a thing. So I think labor costs and our urban, centers are extremely dense when it comes to housing and population.
Right. And I think last question, this is such an interesting topic. Just want to get your insights. When you did the back of the envelope, calculation saying that, 10,000 SKUs and, 30 minutes, what do you see really the unit economics? I mean, do they work out eventually? Do you think you'll see some of these things watch out, or will these end up becoming public goods backed by high funded, like a Walmart?
No, my sense is that they won't be public goods funded by venture money, hedge fund money. I think customers are getting hooked to it. So basically, I think many of these new services require extensive change of consumer behavior. It required, consumers to change behavior when they had to switch from using a bus or an auto rickshaw, beginning to use a cab. So the early stages, all the services had to be heavily discounted. And the question at that point of time was, will customers go back to using a bus when the prices were raised to market rates? Some customers went back to auto rickshaws and buses, but many customers got hooked. The service was so amazing, the experience was so good, they were willing to pay whatever it took. The same thing is going to happen here, which is that there is discounting happening at this point of time, but customers will happily pay whatever premium, you can say a service fee, a convenience fee, and customers will happily pay. They're already paying that for food delivery. So in my opinion, while the business may not grow gangbusters the way it is growing now, it will certainly be a profitable one. It doesn't need too much of a non-stop unending VC supply of VC money.
That's a great take. I think once you really hook them onto a habit from where there's no going back, you have them, like in that sense. Before we proceed, Hari, just a couple of questions I just want to take. One is from Varda and Aniket. Both are talking about scaling up. So Varda is asking that what was the turning point when you realized you were ready to scale businesses? I think probably I would imagine this is more in reference to your belief that your strength is really about being in business which can scale up. And Aniket is saying how important is timing when it comes to scaling a startup.
So if I've understood the question right, I think a business is ready to scale up once there is a product market fit. And I'll be thoughtful about defining what a product market fit is. Consumer love for a product or service, to me, is not an indication of product market fit. An indication of product market fit happens only if a large number of consumers are not just happy with your product or service, but are willing to pay you whatever it takes to make you profitable. To me, that's a product market fit. As long as you are discounting your product, and
Yeah.
customers seem to love it, and they are lining up, to me, that's not yet a sign of product market fit. A real product market fit only happens when you charge them what it takes to make you profitable. To me, that's when a company is ready for scale. Because prior to that, if you scale, then you don't know how much money you will keep on burning, whether you will actually burn all your money and never get customers to continue to shop with you when you raise market prices to market levels. I don't know. But here is the trick, you know what, which is that it is not as black and white as I said it either.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what can happen is you will have to fund losses for an extended period of time before consumers actually get hooked to your product or service, and that we are seeing in food delivery. It happened in urban mobility, happened a lot in these kinds of businesses where you kept burning boatloads of money to hook consumers, and finally things turned around. There were people who continued to be on your platform even after you raised the prices. So I think, there will be situations where you will have to go through an extended period of cash burn to really get a product market fit or to test that product market fit. But in most situations, I think you will be able to honestly figure out. You can put your hand on your heart and say, you know what, customers don't seem to be willing to pay what it takes to make me profitable. So I think sometimes you delude yourself, you lie to yourself, you know what, we customers love our product, we are getting great feedback, and you know what, we will scale. So I think in most businesses, scaling should begin only after you've got a good product market fit.
Right. I think Peter Thiel or somebody has said that, like, um, a startup is really about running a very, very frugal business till such time you figure out what's working.
Yeah.
So it's not about burning money on get-go and looking at scale. It's really about
Yes.
working, because you have to do those pivots. You have to try and understand the customer, the persona. And then when you finally have got that right, that's when
Yeah. Yeah.
so I thought it was a very fascinating definition.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions here which is linked to, the unicorn part of it, right? And Rajesh and Preeti Kaur are asking, what's one unexpected factor that differentiates a unicorn from a successful startup? And I think that's something that I actually had already listed in my question, saying that, look, you've seen three, a pretty good track record. I mean, you've been part of three startups which eventually went on to unicorn status and they did extremely well, right? And what you really found, which is very different about them among so many other startups that really made it work for them, including also Virtuous, because that went on to, be listed on the NASDAQ, right? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think unicorn is a bit of an artificial word. I was, wary about using that word and saying that three of the startups I, was part of building
It's
turned
a
out to be
label.
unicorn.
Go
I
with
actually
whatever you're
wasn't
comfortable with.
proud to even make that claim, because you can have all kinds of unicorns. What is a unicorn? A unicorn is a company with a valuation of $1 billion. You
Right.
can have an extremely profitable company valued on a multiple of EBITDA being a unicorn. So you could have, for example, let's say $40 million company. In terms of EBITDA is $40 million, 25 multiple on that will make a
Right.
company unicorn. You could have a company which is burning cash, extremely loss making, very highly loss making, and still be a unicorn. For example, a
Yeah.
Paytm was a unicorn. Many of these, startups which depended on cash burn to change consumer behavior, they are also unicorns. So you could have unicorns and you could have unicorns. So I don't know whether, what distinguishes a unicorn from something else. Broadly, I'll just keep it simple by saying that, if you're solving a real problem,
Mhm.
you know, and yeah, if you're solving a real problem and addressing a large market, and if you're riding a popular or a mega trend, then you can build a large company. So those are the three factors: solving a real problem, addressing a large market, and riding a mega trend. If you're, satisfying all of these three, you can build a valuable company. So a valuable unicorn is the definition of a valuable company. It could be a loss-making unicorn, it could be a profitable unicorn, but these three factors to me distinguish.
Yeah. I love the third point, which is riding a mega trend, right? Because that ensures that you're not going to be out of fashion very soon, right? You probably
Yes,
have,
yes.
enough, tailwind to kind of take you there. Uh, uh, there's another question here from Jeeves saying, what do you believe makes a startup attractive to large organization? I mean, I would imagine Geely is probably talking in terms of the acquisitions. We had TFS, you had a BB, both of them got acquired by Tata and, by Ola respectively. Also with Daksh, right? Because you had IBM acquiring that, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's some, if you could just linger on that point and say, what makes startup, valuable and interesting to large companies? Yeah.
Understood. So it could be very different in different situations. For example, a taxi for sure was interesting to Ola, not because of any strategic fit, but because that would kill capacity. Ultimately, being able to kill capacity and reduce cash burn was the key objective for the combined entity. Whereas most acquisitions really make sense if there is a strategic fit in terms of capabilities. So, for example, a large company, has two choices: build something that is a new trend, or acquire something that somebody has already built. And there are pros and cons of doing either of them. So I think acquisitions really make sense. Smaller companies become attractive to larger companies if they fill a gap in the strategic capability of the larger company, and that strategic capability is key for the next, phase of growth. If it is very important, then I think a larger company would look at a smaller company in terms of acquisition.
And there's another question. I'm saying, what is the most significant challenge startups face as they scale, and how can founders navigate it effectively? And I think we've seen that with multiple startups. It's one thing to, let's say, have a limited site operation, but when you really start blitzing, scaling up there, or let's say if I was actually speaking with an old colleague of mine, he set up a cafe chain, and now they've hit this number of around 150, 200, and again, they're struggling. So, what do you think really changes, and how can really founders think about the next phase of growth differently?
Right. So there are, the different phases of growth for a startup. And a startup needs to be equipped for dealing with these different phases of growth. And sometimes, a startup is able to adapt to the new phase, and sometimes startups don't adapt to the new phase. And this adaptation is largely internal, which is about culture, which is about leadership, being able to learn. Just think of this, right? You have a 25-year-old founder who wants to rapidly scale a company, right? And a company can grow from zero to becoming a unicorn in maybe 8 years. To
Yeah.
me, it is like a kid who is in fifth grade learning calculus by seventh grade. That is the kind of learning that a founder has to go through to be able to manage a unicorn by the age of 30, for instance, right? So
Hmm.
I think there is a lot of learning on the part of a founder. For example, a founder should be able to hire people who are smarter than her, should be able to delegate, should be able to understand when to delegate and when not to delegate, what to delegate, what not to delegate, what to do
Hmm.
hands on and what to be hands off, what to start doing, what to stop doing, what to continue doing. And what, at what point of time do I put processes in place that can slow down my business? And that is essential too, because you need to be compliant as you grow, because you can't operate a large company the way you operated a much smaller startup, because in that case your big company will just break apart because of centrifugal forces. So when do you
Yeah.
put those mechanisms that can hold this company together and slow it down consciously? How to make the progress from becoming a bit of a bureaucracy to eventually becoming an organization which is highly networked and where there's a lot of collaboration. So I think a lot of learning on the part of founders becomes very essential. And I also think some principles, will have to be unchanged. So one principle which I think is important is, for example, a very strong performance orientation and holding people accountable to me is very important. Being ethical and committed to doing the right things, for example, is very important. Clear thinking, focus, execution is very important, because sometimes, unclear thinking, you can get into muddled thinking, because many of the problems you deal with are complex and there's a lot of noise. So how do you
Right.
separate the noise from the signal? That becomes very critical. So to just filter out all that noise, and many people struggle to filter the noise, they get distracted by noise. So being able to filter that noise, get those clear principles, what are the things that matter, things that don't matter, stay focused on a few things, make those work. Very strong execution, for example, is critical. Making the right kind of choices through connecting the dots. There's so many things, it's not that one thing, you magical stuff, that these three silver bullets and you can scale, and everything is easy after that.
Fascinating. I think you just answered the question that Aman asked. It says, evening, sir, if you could create a startup survival kit, what five items or principles would be inside it? And I think you just kind of talked about
Yeah.
most of them, right? But I'm very curious, Hari, having worked with so many founders closely, you want to call out any founder who you think really kind of, played the game well of being let's say, somebody, the fifth standard learning, the class 8 calculus extremely well, or.
Not fair for me to make that comment because I really believe that, all founders are really good. And I've come to one lesson. The day you begin to make somebody a hero, that hero falls down. And, somebody who was a great hero, everybody admired, suddenly realize that has done a few wrong things and that has led to a collapse. So I think hero worship to me is not really good.
Yeah.
Just focus on doing the right things. Most entrepreneurs are good. I really would like to even say that, what, there are a few entrepreneurs who are really well known and doing good. There are hundreds more who are not well known and doing equally good.
Yeah. I like your line about don't do hero worship. There was a particular person whom I did not exactly worship, but really looked up to. And then I saw him get into some kind of a barrage of exchange with Elon Musk. And
Mhm.
I tweeted like, so one should never meet their heroes, right? Because, they're all human and you sometimes see the
Yes.
fallible side of theirs and which sometimes can be a little unbecoming for them. But yeah, I guess we're just working with people who are normal human beings, right? Shifting gears a bit, Hari, you've now been involved with a lot of funds in an advisory role, and you've been kind of helping them out. Any thoughts? I mean, when you actually sit down nowadays, what is it that you kind of filter out as you kind of process some of the deals that come through your way as a part of maybe the IC thing or as a advisor out there, right? What are you looking out for?
So I think, if you just look at India as a market, a lot of the low hanging fruit has already been taken. The
Mm,
last 2008 setting up of Flipkart, 16 years from 2008 to 2024, a lot of the low hanging fruit has been taken, whether it's in
yeah,
e-commerce or payments or any area you can pick, all the low hanging fruit has been taken. Big companies have been built and multiple decacons have been created.
yeah.
I think now we are reaching a stage where we have to do something unusual, which is how do you solve problems which are not so easy? For example, solving problems for 100 million consumers who are at the top of the socio-economic pyramid is relatively easy. And that's what the startups so far have done. Now,
Mhm.
startups need to begin to solve two other categories of problems, which is problems which the next 400 million Indians have. Those Indians who don't have the ability to pay for convenience, so their expectations of price performance is going to be very different from the price performance expectations of the 100 million at the top of the pyramid. So you have to solve problems in a very frugal way, and you have to imagine, be very imaginative in the way you solve for those problems. So startups have to be very imaginative. The second area, is deep tech. I think India as a nation, I think we had not developed, for whatever reason, the ability to invest in deep tech ideas because of extremely high incubation times, just long gestation periods, and inherent lack of capability in that area. That talent pool itself didn't exist. But in the last 10, 15 years, I think many things have changed on that front as well. Many global MNCs have set up manufacturing centers in India, global capability centers in India. Indians have been working in these capability centers, have learned the tricks of the trade, and are now quitting those companies to figure out how to set up companies without violating IP a lot. For example, you could be working in an R&D facility on turbine manufacture at a GE facility in Bangalore, and a bunch of people, two, three people who have learned that and can step out and actually begin to set up, a startup around that. So I can clearly see deep tech for now seems to be a real possibility. And I think the talent pool also has got built. You can see suddenly, for example, ISRO has figured out that if we have to get to the moon, not that getting to the moon is such a big important goal, but if you have to do, ambitious things, then they cannot do everything in house. They just need to be able to collaborate with private players, and private players could be small companies, they could be, startups, and you can see Agnikul's, Skyroot, so many Galaxy, working very closely with ISRO, and a lot of ISRO scientists, engineers who are retired are now actively contributing to cultivating and nurturing this ecosystem. So I would say solving problems of the next 400 million Indians economically and giving them value propositions and deep tech, I think, are real possibilities that venture funds can look at.
If you could argue that when you look at, let's say, fintech, for example, it started off by solving the problem for the bottom of the pyramid, right? I think the first few companies like the SKS Finance, Suvidha, all of them came with this whole banking correspondent model. They looked at microfinancing, they looked at assisted shopping, through those things. So they actually went the other way around, because at that time, there was really, I mean, mobile-based payments or a payment gateway were really solving for the
Yeah.
higher side. But I guess, of course, there are many more problems that can be solved. But it's interesting that fintech, I think, the first big wave are all trying to solve the problem for the bottom of the pyramid. But
Yeah.
coming to deep tech, what do you really see is the thing that's holding us back? Because with the kind of pool that we have out here, but even now, if you look at it, it probably be I would say AI foundational model will probably not come from India at scale, in that sense, at least in the near future, right?
Yes.
We probably, will struggle to see the next large, let's say, for example, product company coming out of India, right? Anything that you think is holding us back, or is just, like you talked about, patient money is missing because the talent is there, the mindset is there. So what do you think is really the missing, ingredient right now?
Yeah. The way I think about it is that for whatever reasons, because of the way things have taken shape in the last 15 years, all of us have begun to wrongly believe that deep tech equals AI and tech and engineering equals computer science and coding. There is so much to deep tech and deep science beyond coding and beyond AI. For example, material sciences is an area where there's a lot of deep tech work that needs to be done. Biology, for example, there's a lot of deep tech work that needs to be done. Sustainability, green energy, green fuels, hydrogen, all of that is really deep tech. And to me, one of the reasons probably why we have been a bit slow is the lack of institutions, educational institutions that have been doing good R&D. For example, just look at why Boston became the center
Yeah,
for innovation is because of MIT. So
yeah,
many of these educational amazing Stanford, for example, right in the heart of Silicon Valley.
yeah.
So these educational institutions and research institutions actually push the frontiers of knowledge. And a lot of the push that happens on these frontiers of knowledge is not often going to get converted into immediate commercial benefits. But one or two of the ideas that actually, get converted will hit the jackpot. So I think a lot of deep work needs to be done, a lot of research needs to be done, both by educational institutions as well as companies. In India, companies' spend on R&D has been abysmally low, and we all know that. So I think it's a bit of a gradual change, and I think a few factors have to come together, and that can result in a step change. And I can see part of the step change happening. You can see many larger Indian companies have figured out that what, unless we either incubate startups or unless we do genuine R&D, we will no longer be able to stay relevant. So there is a intention clearly in terms of investing in R&D, and you can see ISRO giving a push. So many things suddenly coming together.
That's true. I think things are really accelerating at a phenomenal pace out there. Though I think one area where we could really learn from is the ability for really the institutions and the corporate world working closer. While it's happening,
Yes,
it's not happening at the scale as one would really want that to.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, like for example, we came across a company which was into BMS, battery management system, from IIT Chennai, like and Madras, and the fact that it's probably that IIT Madras has now become a fantastic oasis for people working on the EV technology, right? I think now that's one story that's kind of got out, but I'm sure there's so many other stories which people don't even know about, right? That's happening.
Yes.
So I think that's one area for improvement. But you talked about material science, and maybe now would be a good time for you to just kind of double down as to what's really happening, what's the opportunity size, how are you trying to tap into this opportunity size through Steer World, and what's the kind of structure that you've kind of built for your company to kind of enable this to happen. If you could just stay with that, that would be
Yeah.
helpful.
So very quickly, to just demystify this for a layman and dumb it down, materials revolutions, there have been many throughout human history. For example, man transitioning to the Stone Age, tools of stone was a big leap. Then after that came, metals, bronze and, brass and other metals. Then even in metals, then came iron. Societies which had iron tools, iron weapons began making significant progress, began winning wars. And then after that, you had petroleum, and then you had semiconductors, and then you had plastics. So now every new material has actually transformed humanity, has led to a significant leap in progress, quality of life for all of us. And while we may complain about plastics, the life that we lead today, the wonderful life, is largely because of the innovations in plastics. You cannot lead a day without plastic being everywhere around you. inside a vehicle, inside a home, inside an airplane, when you use a scuba diving suit, anything
Yeah.
that you can think of has wonder plastic material, all kinds of plastic materials, right? So to me, I think revolution is happening in the material sciences space and metallurgy. These are two areas, and there will be other areas which I don't fully know about or understand. So I can talk about, for examples, in the area of plastics, polymers, pharmaceuticals, because pharmaceuticals again is really a polymer. Most pharmaceuticals, the molecules that cure most diseases, in some way are large molecules. They are polymers in some way. So
Right.
I can see, formulation of these, new materials taking shape, equipment that can manufacture or create these formulations taking shape. So to give you an example, biofuels, India is pushing for biofuels in a very big way. And biofuels will be created by actually treating waste agri, which could be rice straw, it could be cotton straw, it could be Napier grass, which is cultivated. And one way, the reason why, before taking this waste and converting that either into gas or ethanol in a digester, this grass needs to be broken up and the cellulose and lignin inside needs to be exposed. And that, technology is now available with us, for example, being able to do that. So the entire process of converting that waste into ethanol becomes far more efficient. So materials technology, for example, drugs, all kinds of new molecules, manufacturing of new drugs. For example, we are likely to move from batch manufacturing to continuous manufacturing. It's a long standing demand of the US FDA that we need to move from batch to continuous. Continuous manufacturing technologies are now making their presence felt. Both the quality as well as will improve, the pricing will come down for these drugs. So many things can get better. Better molecules can be developed. So, for example, I'll give you a wonder material, iron, for example, medication, right? 50+% of women in India and probably the world are actually anemic. And children born to anemic mothers tend to have lots of cognitive disabilities. So if you have to
Right.
solve for this problem, you need to find ways in which you can provide iron supplements. Iron supplements are available, but they are not bioavailable. So women take them and they don't enter the bloodstream and cause the right kind of positive impact. They create side effects which are worse than the disease itself. So iron
Yeah.
medication is not used. So now technologies are available where you can create bioavailable iron. So very, very interesting problems, are being solved, I think, in the area of biology, material sciences, all coming together.
And how have you structured, Steerworld to kind of deal with this? I mean, are you incubating, are you investing, or are you, intracubating? What's really happening out there?
So Steer World, by its own, by its birth and DNA, is an extremely innovative company. Innovation is written into the DNA of this company. So in fact, the first business, which is a machinery manufacturing business, that we supply machines to plastics and polymers compounding companies. Just to give you a sense of the innovation, I'll just take a minute.
Sure.
Sometime during the World War, Second World War, Britain controlled the entire rubber territory in this world, and Germany had no access to rubber. So Germany went, on an accelerated mode to produce synthetic rubber, and they succeeded in producing synthetic rubber sometime in 1942. But 1944 was when the real breakthrough happened in terms of being able to, create polymers. And that piece of equipment was called a twin screw co-rotating self-wiping equipment. And that device was engineered by a very famous engineer, German engineer by name Rudolf Erdmenger. From 1944 to 1994, there was really no change in that piece of equipment. But in 1994, that change happened. And a next level of innovation happened not in Japan, not in Germany, but in India. A Steer founder, which is Dr. Babu Padmanabhan, figured out that using fractional geometry, you can make fundamental changes to that piece of equipment that will allow you to process very sensitive material, sensitive to heat and sensitive to shear. So that's how we are able to, using fractional geometry, transform drugs as well, use it for drugs manufacture. And therefore, we have continuously been using our core capabilities to incubate new businesses that solve new problems. For example, one big problem that humanity faces today is how to deal with multi-layer plastic waste, commingled multi-layer. You can, for example, take a PET bottle and recycle it because it's just one polymer. PET. But when polymers are mixed up, in packaging materials, FMCG packaging, a Bonvita packet, for example, has got multiple layers. It's even got a metal coating inside. And there's no way to reprocess this or recycle. So these kind of plastics are being dumped in rivers, landfills, oceans. So we are using our technology to innovate and convert all of this economically into a material that resembles wood and has the properties of wood and is cheaper than wood. So you're solving two problems simultaneously: deforestation as well as disposal of plastic waste. So we've been innovating, continuously by incubating new businesses that can solve new kinds of problems using our technologies.
Fascinating stuff. I think you really seem to be on the cutting edge of what's really happening out there. And I think also when you look at, when you talked about sustainability, I think the other big area is really about food and biotech technology right now, right? I mean,
Yes.
there's some crazy stuff happening, especially with fermentation, precision fermentation, synthetic meat, and I don't know. Do you have any take on that? Are you involved in any of those areas?
Yeah. So since we have the technology to produce synthetic meat,
Hmm.
but we realize that it's not a really big market in India,
Yeah,
and this high moisture meat analog, HMMA. We really
yeah.
realize there's not a big market for that, and that's not something that we are pursuing. But foods and flavors, absolutely true. For example, India imports a lot of encapsulated flavors.
Hmm.
Encapsulated flavor really means that the flavor is encapsulated and does not get released until it meets the right conditions. So Baskin
Right.
Robbins ice cream, for example,
Yeah.
beautiful, tastes good. It's good because of the encapsulated flavors. The moment the ice cream hits your mouth, interiors of your mouth, the flavors burst open. And that's what makes it so good. And we have technology that can make those encapsulated flavors in India. Encapsulated coffee granules, for example, right? They are priced so high, so premium, because they last much longer and they taste better as compared to the ordinary coffee, where the flavor, just disappears once you open the bottle and it's not as fresh. But once you encapsulate the flavors, the prices of coffee become high, and the flavors can remain for a year. So food flavors is absolutely interesting space as well.
I think it's lovely, and I would love to just keep talking about this, Hari, but I just want to switch gears a bit and really, kind of, dive into, Hari, the author, right? And you've written some very interesting books, 7 books of them. And could you kind of just share, is there any common thought? I mean, there's one book on Jugaad, there's one book on, on not being politically correct and stuff like that. Any common thread that you kind of see across the books that you've kind of focused on?
I'm not sure I see a common thread that way, Vivek. So, for example, saying no to Jugaad was the making of Big Basket. That book really was really about how do you build a startup
Yeah.
without resorting to shortcuts. Jugaad is not a positive term in this context that I've used it. You can use it positively by saying it means
Yeah.
frugal innovation. If Jugaad means frugal innovation, that's good. But if
Mm,
Jugaad means taking shortcuts to everything, that's bad. So
mm,
sometimes, startups and companies tend to take shortcuts, especially when they're chasing aggressive growth targets. But how do you
mm,
get your foundation right? So that book was about getting your foundation right on everything. It's not just about building a product. It's not just about building the right, technology so that it can scale without it breaking, once you hit scale. It's also about culture, because even in culture, you can take shortcuts. Even in
yeah.
governance, you can take shortcuts. So Jugaad is not good anywhere, whether it's in product or technology or
I
culture.
completely echo that thought because somehow we've made a big fancy thing around the Jugaad, mindset in India, and that sometimes just holds us from, being the best out there, right?
Being the best
Yeah,
out there. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, please carry on. Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
I don't think there is really a common theme. For example, in that book From Pony to Unicorn, that's really about how do you scale in a sustainable manner. So different
mhm,
aspects of being able to scale in a sustainable manner we've talked about, which is founder evolution. What does the founder have to learn along the way? Role of capital, role of overcapitalization, role of what you can do, what wrong you can do. If you are sitting on too much capital, what kind of foolish decisions you could take if you are overcapitalized. So we've talked a lot about, and some enduring principles which will not change with time. So every book, I would say, has a different theme. The only theme that probably runs common across is we've tried to demystify, and I've written them in a manner that it is not sounding like jargon to anybody. The way I would put it is that a person who does not have a deep understanding of the domain should be able to read it and say, wow, I've had some aha moments. A person who deeply understands the domain should also be able to say, I never thought about it like this. So those are some of the principles we kept in mind while writing.
Based on the books and your experience, I mean, if you were to distill down and have some, key 3 or 4 insights or takeaways for a person who's starting up, what would that be?
Difficult to say, but let me just attempt answering this question,
Yeah, sure.
which is,
I mean, I know this will never be very straightforward, but yeah.
Yes. So, for example, I would say that, sometimes founders can actually talk to friends, talk to relatives about the idea that they're trying to build on and get very positive feedback. To me, that's not a great place to be in, because you should really test the quality of your idea by discussing this with people who can ask you hard questions, can ask you difficult questions. Because if you don't do that, you can believe you're solving a real problem and you have a real product. So I think for a founder, the first question that every founder must ask very deeply and find an honest answer is, am I solving a real problem? Do I have a real product? That's something that's very important. And of course, there are many other things, which is that, founders tend to overestimate the size of a market. Founders tend to believe that the market is big, and therefore I can build a large and profitable company around solving that problem. There's so many problems which are big. There's so many problems where the pain is intense, but you just cannot build a large and profitable company by solving those problems, because the ability to pay by lining up all the ducks is so difficult where you can make money out of it. For example, plastics disposal is a big problem. Climate is a big problem. Nutrition for the poor people is a big problem. Primary education is a big problem. Housing, affordable housing is a big problem. But many of these, are not easy to solve. So just because the market is big, don't assume that, you can build a large and profitable company around it. So some of these things, I think I would tell founders, apply first principles thinking, achieve a lot of balances, I would say. For example, balancing between, staying with an idea for some time or for too long versus making a pivot too early. The right kind of balance is very essential. So I think there are balances in so many things, growth versus profitability. There's no black and white. You have to achieve that fine balance. Lord Buddha told, us, probably 2,500 years ago, that moderation is the key to every problem in life, right? No excesses, don't swing to any extreme. So that's another thing I would maybe talk about.
Absolutely. I think Madhyam Marg is the right way to do things. The problem is you only see the Madhyam Marg after you pause, kind of pass that line, and knowing it's probably an art form, right? Knowing exactly when to switch from one phase to another or pivot or not pivot. I mean, these are really, stuff that become great lows later on. But I guess sometimes when you're in the trenches fighting the battle, you can't really blame the founders for, missing that thing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a small rapid fire that we put together by the team. We have a young team out here, and I'm just going to shoot them out. Would just love your reactions on that, right? So the first one is one word that your friends would use to describe you.
Probably authentic and speaks his mind without fear.
Nice, and I can believe that. One hobby you wish you had more time for.
Probably the only hobby I wish I had more time was travel. I really wish to travel a lot with my wife. We have similar interests. Travel to a lot of small places in India, unknown places in India, unknown histories. I'd love to travel, just don't have the time.
Lovely. The most inspiring entrepreneur today.
No, I can't name one, because I really admire every entrepreneur. Anybody who is, not, taking up a safe job, is willing to take that risk, is a great person. And I have no names.
I'm curious, are you long on Elon or short on Elon?
I think Elon is a necessary evil for the world. I think he pushes people to think, out of the box. He is very provocative, and that's his style. Through his provocative style, he gets people to think. While, there is probably a method to his madness. So I think there is a place for an Elon Musk in this world.
Absolutely. Favorite historical era or event that you think about?
Undoubtedly, it has to be India's struggle for independence and India attaining independence at the stroke of midnight.
And if you could have dinner with any inventor, scientist, or an entrepreneur, if I may add, who would that be?
I mean, I could have that at dinner with hundreds of inventors. For example, if I go back in history, Marconi, the guy who invented the radio, John Bardeen, Shockley, the transistors. a person who discovered penicillin, Fleming. I just love to have. I'm a science buff. More than business leaders, I would love meeting scientists. I would love meeting social reformers. I would love to meet people who are solving humanity's wicked problems.
And if there was one technology you wish was invented already, what would that be?
I think many technologies. One is, for example, fusion. If fusion energy could have been commercialized and we could have figured out how to do it and scale, how to
Yeah.
separate water into, hydrogen and oxygen economically, how to separate salt from saline water.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, right? All of that.
Yeah.
So great, and as we kind of come to the close, I mean, how do you really balance your, your professional ambition with personal growth and fulfillment? Are you able to follow the Madhyam Marg out there?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, that line is not, cannot be drawn in stone. People talk of work-life balance. I would flip it and say there is work at life and there is work outside. There's life at work and life outside work. And the
Right.
only thing that's common is life. You have work and you have something other than work.
Right.
And I enjoy my work. So therefore, that's a very important element of happiness. If you enjoy work and if you do what you love to do, then that's such a big thing that's already taken care of. And outside of work, my wife and I have common interests. We love to travel. We love to listen to the same kinds of music, same similar films we
Nice.
love to watch. So I'm very happy and able to do this balance reasonably effortlessly and honestly.
No, wonderful, Hari. I think this was such a fantastic, Thinkly Talk session. I really enjoyed it every bit. I hope you did too. And I think the people on the podcast would have just taken away so many nuggets of, wisdom today. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. I loved it, Vivek. I absolutely loved being a part of your podcast. Honored.